your last role was head of Meta Ireland, which we used to call Facebook.
Yep.
And also, what's next for you in the future. So before we go to your routes, I want to start with your roots.
And I always consider myself the luckiest kid around because that was part of my early upbringing, was having to navigate, a dynamic family that maybe not everybody else has. While I have this Boston persona, and I definitely identify as being a Bostonian, I didn't get in a lot of trouble growing up. I did things that I probably shouldn't have, but I was good at not getting caught. My first job was at Burger King, flipping burgers, bobbing for French fries. Not the most glamorous thing. My real first job, if you could say it, while I was in school was I sold, oh my God, if I'm making $325 a week, I'm 19 years old, I'm thinking that I'm gonna be rolling in the dough, right? This was in like 1999 to, coming across 2000. And I'm looking at this internet thing and I'm like, wow, this is really exciting. And back then it was Yahoo, Lycos, Excite, Alta Vista. And that's one of the things about me is I'm always looking at the leaderboards. I was, 90% to goal or something like that. And all I could think of was like, oh my God, I'm getting fired.
Doing ads around the 2000 and doing ads now. What do you think the difference?
Oh my goodness. Like the most, I've actually never been asked that before.
My first question to you, why did you decide to move out of US?
Like, it's sometimes the best thing in the world is the jobs you didn't get. I'd even take a step back, Camille, because I think there's one important thing too when you ask about the responsibility there.
What challenges did you see coming out of US and the European market?
It was difficult, for her to make that sacrifice, and it's one that I eternally appreciate.
Yeah, thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, exactly.
Walk me through your decision-making process, or what did you see in Facebook that time that you were ready to basically jump the ship? So you have some Irish roots?
I do, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Which part of Ireland from?
That 14-year journey that I was on, that like I've been able to hold Nelson Mandela's Peace Prize. I've had dinner in Buckingham Palace. I've met princes in India, in Jaipur.
After Christmas parties.
Yeah.
The Bloody Marys.
I guess, yeah. I said, let's have a Bloody Mary party at 11 o'clock in the morning the next day for two reasons.
You get into gaming and app monetization. How that transition happened? What was that opportunity like?
And it ended up becoming, double-digit percentage of Facebook revenue. It was a massive component to how Facebook was making money back then.
And the hard question now, Rick, is after 14 years, enjoying your every moment, why you decide to leave Meta?
There's a couple things that I would say to this. Number one,
you mentioned about 25 lessons you learned over 25 years.
Yeah. Well, I guess in my post-Meta career, I've found myself now working with...
How are you on a personal level, Rick, outside the work, the startups, the charities? What do you do in your spare time? What message you want to share to our audience? Hi, Rick. How are you?
Good. It's great to see you again. And thanks for having me here.
Welcome to the show. And it's been a long time. I know we bumped into each other on the Dublin Tech Summit, but it was a very short conversation. But Today I have a time, I have you, and I'm looking forward to learning your story and learning how you climb the ladder of the corporate world. And, your last role was head of Meta Ireland, which we used to call Facebook.
Yep.
And also, what's next for you in the future. So before we go to your routes, I want to start with your roots. And let's start with story from Boston. That's where you're from.
Yeah. So originally I'm from the Massachusetts area, about 45 minutes north of Boston. And grew up there for the first 13, 14 years. And, my parents had divorced at an early age. And I always consider myself the luckiest kid around because most people would say, oh my God, your parents got divorced. How can you feel lucky about that? But they also both remarried around the time when I was 6. And those are both my step-parents to this day. So I've had a stepmom since I was 6 years old. I've had a stepdad since I was 6 years old. So I've grown up having 4 parents that really love and care about me and me to them. And of course, their extended families. And so that was part of my early upbringing, was having to navigate, a dynamic family that maybe not everybody else has. And that led to a point in my life when I was 13 when my stepdad got transferred. He got a new job down in the Philadelphia area. So I moved down to Pennsylvania, which is about 6 hours away from Boston, for those of you that aren't familiar with the geography of the Northeast of the United States, which meant, here I am in high school, or entering the second year of high school, and I had to make new friends and, leave, the core of my family, which were all in the Boston area, and kind of start over down in the Pennsylvania area. And, I finished out my 3 years of remaining years of high school there, and then went to school outside of Pittsburgh. So while I have this Boston persona, and I definitely identify as being a Bostonian, I spent 3 years down in Philadelphia area, and then another 4 years in Pittsburgh. And when I got out of school, when I got out of college, I would have taken a job anywhere in America. My stepdad had worked for FedEx, and he was in sales there. And I think we oftentimes find careers based on what we see, whether it's a parent or a brother or uncle or what have you. And my father, in fact, was in the probation department in Massachusetts, so juvenile probation, and I always thought that looked really interesting as a career. But my stepdad was in a career in sales at FedEx, and I ended up pursuing marketing and sales in college. And when I got out of school, I said, I will move anywhere in America to get this job at FedEx to be a salesperson. It sounds like a great place to build a career. You're well trained. It's a great brand to work for. So I started applying, and, with my stepdad's help of finding some opportunities around the country. But the one place where I happened to get the job was Boston.
Okay.
So I didn't have this grand plan to move back to Boston after finishing college down in Pennsylvania. However, it's the role that I got. And so, magically, here I go. I moved back to the Boston area. My dad, my stepmom, all my brothers live up there. And yeah, like it just seemed to be fate that it brought me back to the Boston area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the fate, absolutely. Before we talk about your sales executive job, how was your upbringing, Rick? And how was America at that time? I know it's very different at this point. How was the upbringing? What you would like to do as a kid?
I mean, I probably was just a pretty normal kid. I like to play sports, whether it be baseball, basketball. I always had a fair amount of friends. I would say it would be a fairly unremarkable childhood. I was middle class. I had loving parents and so forth. I did have five. I have five brothers, but I am the oldest of them all, and I am 8 years older than my next youngest brother, and I'm 18 years older than my youngest brother. So there's a pretty big age disparity. So I kind of grew up almost not as an only child, but certainly I didn't have any siblings that were about my own age. And so it meant, when I moved to Pennsylvania or any other time, I had to have friends, and I couldn't rely on brothers to be my pals at that early age.
Yeah.
Now we look at the fact that we're all much, much older, and my brothers are all my best pals. But growing up, it wasn't always that case.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say I had a pretty normal childhood, pretty unremarkable, and but one that I'm fond of.
How is it to be like an elder brother? Because I am the eldest in my family. I have three more siblings. How is being elder of another, four brothers? Do you feel that responsibility at that age when you were there?
I think I am a pretty responsible person. I've always felt like, okay, what is expected of me, and I've got to follow that path. You got to go to college. Boom. So you end up doing that, or I didn't get in a lot of trouble growing up. I did things that I probably shouldn't have, but I was good at not getting caught. And I think that it's not like I had to babysit my brothers when they were coming home from school or things of that nature. Like I didn't really have that, responsibility put on me. But yeah, I think one naturally looks at, when someone's 8 years older, they look up to you, and you want to show them the right path, and whether it be career wise or how to navigate different personal, issues that you overcome, because frankly, I would have done it, already in advance of them. Yeah.
So now, how is your relationship with your brothers? Like now, you're like friends and hang out together when you go back to US?
Yeah, look, I just spent 7 weeks in the States, coming home just this past Saturday. Saw 4 out of 5 of my brothers. Either they came and stayed with me, or yeah, they all stayed at our beach house.
Yeah.
And so I mean, it's one of the reasons I love going back is because not only do I get to hang out with my siblings, but my kids get to know their uncles. And like,
Yeah.
look, we live here in Ireland. They're all either in the Boston or Philadelphia area, so there's not a lot of time for my kids to spend with them. But when we go to Maine, like that's what it's all about, and that's why my kids they want to move to Maine. They want to move to that area because it's always a party. Oh,
Yeah.
Uncle Steve's here, Uncle Matt, or Brendan, Scotty, Brent. It's always a good time in the house. We're watching sports, we're laughing. It's always a
Yeah.
good time. They think it's that way every day,
Every day,
and
yeah.
it's obviously not. But it's a good thing that we get to show them.
Yeah, but it's a nice way to spend summer than spend time with family members. So that's great.
Yeah, it's good.
Absolutely. Back to your university, Rick. What did you study there?
Marketing.
Marketing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when you're 17, 18 years old, you don't know what you want to do for the rest of your life. But I did know a job in sales could be fairly lucrative. And when you're young, your priorities are always different. And so I said, I think that that's a path that I want to, pursue. I felt like I was a pretty outgoing person, and I love the whole idea around advertising and marketing, and so I followed that path. I think one of the a couple of things that were pretty interesting is like my first job was at Burger King, flipping burgers, bobbing for French fries. Not the most glamorous thing, but I was 16 years old, and look, we didn't come from loads of money, and I needed to my parents instilled in me that I needed to have a job and support some things that my own spending cash, gas money, things like that. And I found out pretty quickly that I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. And I ended up moving more towards sporting goods. And, that was my second job, was basically being a sneaker salesman. And when I got into college, I recognized that there's going to be a lot of people competing with me for jobs when I get out of school. And am I the kid that worked at a bar or was a waiter? That's not going to help me get my next job. So one of my real first job, if you could say it, while I was in school, was I sold $1,400 vacuum cleaners in a pretty economically depressed area of Western Pennsylvania. It wasn't even Pittsburgh, the city. It was like the suburban Pittsburgh area, which was very rural and very working class, blue collar. But I went to go and take that job, and I answered an ad that said guaranteed $325 a week salary. And I'm like, oh my God, if I'm making $325 a week, I'm 19 years old. I'm thinking that I'm going to be rolling in the dough, right? So funny enough, my dad's like, Rick, you are going to fail at that. That has got to be a scam. There's no way. And I said, I'm going to give it a go. And that first week I worked my tail off, and I was out there doing demonstrations in people's houses, and I was explaining how the vacuum cleaner worked. The whole premise was that I would clean a rug for them for free if they watched this demonstration. And in that first week, I probably worked 70 hours and I sold none of them. And I said, oh boy, this isn't great. I just spent probably $200 on gas money that I didn't have. This is better turn around real quick. The following week, I sold one or two. And then as I got better at doing this whole thing and overcoming objections, I started selling about 3 of these things a week. Now I was making maybe $500-$600 a week, not even the $350 that was guaranteed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm drinking Heineken, baby, and everybody else is drinking,
colas.
Yeah, exactly, crappy Bud Light or whatever it was. And I realized there that all my other friends were maybe taking a different path of a job that you would typically take if you were in college or 19 years old. And I was developing some platforms and some skills that I would use when I go in and talk to FedEx in 3 years from that point about why actually, I do have experience. I have done sales before. Here's an example of where I, kickstarted my career and did something that was, somewhat professional versus doing things that might have been a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you talk about the responsibility and where you took the responsibility to, manage your own expenses.
Yeah.
When you were flipping burgers.
Yeah.
and then the real taste of sales at 19. And as you said, right, first week nothing happened, you didn't give up.
Yeah.
Second week, one or two sales, and now you understand what's happening. So absolutely, learning the ropes on the floor is the way to go. What I see from your very first experience is it's not about giving up, it's about keep the consistency going and things will happen. It takes time, right? So
Yeah.
absolutely. So did you get into your dream job of working in FedEx?
I did. So it's funny. I graduate school, and again, I wanted to get into the company pretty badly, and so I had accepted a job to be a driver, delivering packages, because that was going to be my foothold in the door. And I knew I was going to start from the beginning, and then I'd do that for a year or two, and then I could move into sales, and away I go. But after accepting the driver job, I also was given an interview for a sales job in the Boston area that I just talked about. And I went up, I prepared like you would never believe, mock questions. I was really felt like, hey, I'm gonna show up if I'm gonna get this opportunity.
Yeah.
And I nailed it. I don't know what the discussions were like behind the scenes, but essentially, within 2 interviews, they were making an offer to me. And then 6 weeks later, I'm driving up the I-95 from Pennsylvania to Boston and finding an apartment and living on my own, at 22 years old now, and
Nice.
working at FedEx.
What were you selling in FedEx?
Basically shipping solutions. So
Okay.
if you're a company that manufactures, widgets or whatever they are, you could use UPS, you could use the Postal Service, or you could use FedEx. Whether that's the key priority is the cheapest or the fastest or the most reliable. So I'd go in and say, hey, cheap is one way to do it, or inexpensive is one way to do it, but sometimes getting it there faster could lead to savings in other area, reduced inventory or what have you.
Yeah.
So I would go in and work on that, and I did that for about 3 years. I think what I recognized is that while that was great for my stepdad, and that's what I saw, it wasn't the most invigorating product to sell in my eyes.
Yeah.
For some people, they loved it, and that was great. It was great because you'd learn about, if I think back at some of my key customers, EMC, so storage solutions, right? Big customer of ours. Or it was, a company that sold horse saddles and shipping those all around the world. Or another company that was, medical solutions. So I was always learning different products and so forth. But this was in like 1999 to, coming across 2000. And I'm looking at this internet thing and I'm like, wow, this is really exciting. People are, there's companies that are like delivering dog food to your door the next day, or, whatever it is. That was a really exciting endeavor. And so while I wasn't necessarily planning to leave FedEx at that time, I went to a job fair and I met the people that were recruiting for Lycos. And I don't know whether you remember Lycos, but that was one of the very first generation search engines. They had a little black lab dog. And back then it was Yahoo, Lycos, Excite, Alta Vista. These were the companies that,
Yeah.
it was before Google.
Yeah.
And they were the companies that people went to find the information on the internet. So I became, I went through the interview process to be an ad sales person, there. And I, all of a sudden started selling ads for, basically if you were selling the keyword, lawyer, the lawyer ad would appear,
Yeah.
and, all their different networks of site. And I loved that job. And I was pretty good at it. Like I was always at the top of the leaderboard. And that's one of the things about me is I'm always looking at the leaderboard saying, shit, I'm number 3 or 4. I gotta get to the
Yeah.
top of that. And I did that for a couple of years, and the company was struggling. I basically joined the internet the day the internet bubble burst, which was like March of 2000.
Yeah.
And I stuck with it though for a couple of years at that company, but it really was struggling. And Yahoo had just decided to open up an office in Boston for an ad sales team. So at that point, back in 2002, Yahoo is the creme de la creme. It's the top of the industry. Google now was starting to make some noise, but it still wasn't anything like
Yeah.
it was or it is today. And a buddy of mine that was working at Lycos got a job at Yahoo, and they had formed a team with about 15 people. And they said, hey, Rick, why don't you come and interview and join the team? So I did that, and it's a funny story. So whatever, they formed this team in November. I joined, as kind of the second wave in January, so only like 8 or 9 weeks later. And I just told you how much I always would be looking at the whiteboard. Well, you come in, you've got now 15 sales reps on the back of the room. So every time you walk to the canteen or every time you walk to the bathroom, you see where your name is on that whiteboard. You're like, man, like that's you're coming in now late, you don't have a book of business or anything. And so you're at the bottom of the list. But what I did have was I'd been working in this industry now for the last 2 years with Lycos. I knew the type of companies that would advertise on the web. I knew the type of companies that can scale big campaigns, and not necessarily did everybody else in the room have that. So I would work my tail off, banging out the phones, and basically closing quite a bit of business in those first 90 days. And I can remember maybe 10 or 11 weeks in, I was 90% to goal or something like that. And all I could think of was like, oh my God, I'm getting fired. I'm getting fired. I'm at 90% to goal and I've been here for 8 weeks. This is, it was the insecurities that I had younger in my career. It's like, oh, I'm about to get married. How am I going to afford the wedding? I can't afford a honeymoon if I don't kick ass in this job. And it's what kept me up at night, and to the point where, I worked hard enough to close a couple of big deals. And then within those last couple of weeks, I was able to scream past my goal and kept that going for about three different quarters. And then they made me a manager because that team was growing so profoundly that they needed to add some management layers. And now I had, about 3 years in that type of a role. Had the FedEx experiences before that. And then I became my first management job at around 26 years old, I think.
I'm going to move forward quickly asking one question.
Yeah.
Doing ads around the 2000 and doing ads now. What do you think the difference?
Oh my goodness. Like the most, God, I've actually never been asked that before, but what a dichotomy of like the data that we have nowadays to, serve the right ad to the right person. Back then it was like buying run of site or run of a channel, like, the sports channel, the finance channel, the health channel, and maybe buying something called the keyword back then. And then we started getting into behavioral targeting and okay, this person maybe visited the fantasy sports site, and so we're going to serve them, a fantasy sports ad, over here. That was the beginning of it. But just seeing that whole history of how that evolved is it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That's a whole other chat.
Exactly. Just last question on that. Was it more simple because there was less information and less anomalies around? Because now we have so much information, so much data that it is so complex, right? But technology helps. But around that time, it was more simple, straightforward to do the ads.
Maybe it was simple, but not better.
Not better.
So at that point, the internet was still an experimental budget. People were putting money into newspapers, TV, radio, but they put a couple of bucks over here into internet advertising. But it really had no proof of concept. Measurement was nowhere near what it is today. Like people were measuring based on how many click-throughs they got, their click-through percentage. They didn't have the ability to really measure downstream conversions, which is what we all do, now. Yeah. So the data that I have available to me in 2023 or 24, you can prove that the ad dollars are being well spent. Whereas back in 2000, 2001, 2002, it felt good to be seen on the internet, but you didn't necessarily drive the results, or you didn't know that you drove the results.
Yeah, I mean, you can absolutely see how many newspaper you are selling, how many listeners on the radio, but how you prove that internet part, because it was way too early to understand the whole system as a whole.
Yeah, and back then we were negotiating CPMs. Like everything was based on cost per thousand impression. Yeah. So how many times, if your ad was shown 1,000 times, that would cost you maybe $5, maybe $25, maybe $50. And that's what we negotiated with clients back then, they wanted a lower CPM. Never mind that it might have been the most perfect placement where they had all these conversions and sales and so forth. But that's what we, traded upon. Yeah. Whereas now nobody even cares what a CPM is, as long as it works and it converts for them and so forth. So that job has changed entirely.
Yeah. Back to FedEx, and then you work in Yahoo, and then you moved out of US. My first question to you, why did you decide to move out of US?
Well, so if I look at what my managerial role was at Yahoo, certainly was running a sales team, whatever, 7 or 8 different sales reps at the time. But also, my responsibility was to do all the recruiting, advertising, hiring, and onboarding of any new sales rep that came into that Boston office. And at that time, now it's after a couple of years, there's about 100, and, I don't know, maybe 130, 140 people in that Boston office, all selling media and Yahoo ads for basically the United States, calling into all the big direct response advertisers, agencies, and so forth. So it was my job to find the right salespeople and then deploy them onto other sales teams within the office. And that gave me a reputation for being able to build teams, being able to hire quality, deal with some HR issues around offers and negotiating salaries and so forth. And we never had a similar team in Europe to this team that we had in Boston. So the company said to me, "Hey, Rick, would you by any chance," at this point I'm like 31 or 32 years old, "would you have an interest in moving to Barcelona and starting a pan-European sales team for Yahoo services in Europe?" I'd never been to Spain. I don't speak Spanish, or I didn't at the time. And thankfully, I didn't have any kids. I had a wife that was very supportive. But we said, wow, what an adventure this would be. It'd be to pick up and move and live a life in Barcelona. So we made that call. And it's funny, prior to that, about 4 months earlier, I had also raised my hand for a job in Australia, being the country manager for Yahoo out of Australia. And I never was really seriously considered for it. Again, I was still pretty junior, and I didn't have any experience in the Australian market. But I raised my hand because an international experience was something that I thought would be interesting. And thank God I didn't get that job, because it wasn't the right role for me. Whereas the one that was in Barcelona was cookie cutter made for me, right? Like it's basically what I was doing in the States, and then translating that to a European market. And I had to learn about the markets, and Barcelona is a great city to have people move to. Everybody wants to move there, and it's Europe's playground. But so like it's sometimes the best thing in the world is the jobs you didn't get.
Yeah.
Because the one that came shortly thereafter was one that I could really be successful in.
Yeah, absolutely. And how was your role in Spain?
It's the first. I always say that it's like you go from being a boy to a man, because in that Boston office, I had 1 or 2 layers of I had 2 layers of leadership above me in that office, right? So anytime a big executive came to town, I might have been in the room, but certainly somebody else was running the show. When I went to Barcelona, now all of a sudden, it's my job to build out a team. It's my job to handle all the HR issues. When something goes wrong, it's me. When the CEO of Europe comes to town, I'm hosting, taking him out to dinner. So at a very young age, when you think about it, leadership wise, I'm now starting to manage, at the end of my tenure there was like 60, 70 people. It was big money. I was changing the way that the operating procedures for European sales for Yahoo, because at the time, all the countries sold everything from the top customers to the smallest. And then here I come in the centralized team, basically changing the way that they operate. And I had to do a lot of difficult negotiating and difficult changing business practices with the country managers of France and the UK and everything else, while remaining, strong coworkers, but also taking away some of the, the responsibilities that they had. So I look at that as I learned a lot in about 2.5 years and had to take on a lot of responsibility. And there are things that I do today in my career that I only do now because I didn't do them properly then.
Yeah.
And it takes experience, and it takes going through some of these things to learn that might not be the best way to approach it. These are an easy, this might not be worth fighting over, even though in the time it feels like it's a big issue, and then also, creating a real standard operating procedure around that, so that you're not negotiating these things in the moment all the time, but you have a blueprint to why things go that way. But I'd even take a step back, Camille, because I think there's one important thing too when you ask about the responsibility there. I didn't take for granted that job was going to be mine. So I didn't know until after the fact that they really wanted me to come and do that. Like I thought I was kind of applying, and there was probably a bunch of other people applying. And so even though it was a natural role for me based on what I had been doing, I prepared for that job, kind of like I did with the FedEx role,
Yeah.
like you wouldn't believe. I created a 39-page PowerPoint presentation on how I was going to build the team, the accounts we were going to call on, what our, sweet spot was going to be. I was going to hire X amount of people for this market, that market, this. And I basically walked in, flying from Boston to London, where the interview was, and I put that on my then boss's desk, and I said, "This is how we're going to do this. I've thought about it. You want to know how we're going to prospect? Boom. You want to know how we're going to find an office? Boom. You want to know what our dress code's going to be in that office?
Yeah.
Boom." I try to think of everything and show that I was prepared. And little did I know that it was a kind of a recruiting trip where he wanted me to, come and take that job, but I didn't take for granted that it was going to be mine, and I had thought deeply about how to make that team successful.
So, with all the preparation you have done with the huge PowerPoint presentation, how you're going to build everything in Spain, first time you were out of US, and it's a very different culture. Europe is very different than America. Except your, fully planned plan, what challenges did you see coming out of US and the European market?
Well, I think first of all, the year was 2007. And so technology is not what it is today. So personally, while I was very excited to move there, as was my wife, even communicating with people back home was not as easy. There really wasn't video conferencing. So you'd be talking to parents, right, on the phone. Calling was very expensive because there was no such thing as like internet. Now you don't even think about an international phone call because you do it via WhatsApp or via iMessage or whatever. That wasn't the case. So staying connected with my roots was more difficult. But also, Spain didn't allow my wife to get a work visa. So she had a career in ad sales. She worked at an ad network herself, and she had to make the decision to give up that career to support my own. And it's one of the things that I always talk about is like, you need to have a supportive spouse when anytime you make one of these decisions, because had she not been, or she chose to not say yes to this opportunity, then it wouldn't have meant that we would have moved. So it was difficult, for her to make that sacrifice, and it's one that I eternally appreciate.
Yeah, thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So Yahoo was very established that time, being in the US, having operations in Europe, and you were there leading. Facebook was very new that time, probably a startup, and you moved to Facebook in 2009.
Yeah.
That was a big decision. So walk me through your decision-making process, or what did you see in Facebook that time that you were ready to basically jump the ship?
Well, I certainly wasn't. I think so this is, I started my first conversations with Facebook in late 2008. One of my good buddies became the first Facebook employee in Europe from Yahoo. And he ended up giving me a call and saying, "We're going to open up an office in Dublin. We're going to need a sales team there, much like the one that you've just built in Barcelona. Are you interested in talking to us about that?" And, after 2.5 years in Spain, things were difficult in terms of me flying back to Boston. There was no direct flights. So getting back and forth was kind of difficult. I didn't speak the language incredibly well. Like I had taken lessons. My wife had now become very proficient, and she still is at Spanish. But like communicating, I kind of felt illiterate, not being able to read a newspaper all that effectively and so forth. And so I said, I don't know if I want to live in Spain long term. I'm not ready to leave Europe, but I don't know if Spain is it. And they were making it very difficult to renew visas and so forth because the economy was now 2008, 2009. The bank all crashed and it was hard. So I said, okay, let's talk to Facebook. I'm not going to take this job, but let's see what it's all about, right? And at that time, Facebook was losing money left and right. Their revenue was literally, 500 million a year. So it was tiny compared to anything that you see today. And there were only 900 employees in the company when I joined it. So that just, now, or, a couple of years ago, there were 90,000 employees. So there's a massive difference between what it was when I took that phone call versus what it ended up becoming. But the promise of being able to be on the European leadership team, to be in a hot startup that certainly didn't have guarantees of being successful, but you kind of had this feeling that some momentum was behind this, like this could be a pretty amazing ride.
Yeah.
So Dublin is closer to Boston, English speaking. My last name's Kelley, so like, boom,
Fit
I
nice
belong,
into
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And so my wife and I said, look, let's go and do this for 2 years, and let's see how we like living in Ireland. And my father is a very proud Bostonian Irishman, and to see his son go from not being a Boston or an American Irish, but to actually living in Ireland,
Yeah.
like I was the prodigal son returning home, man. And so
you have some Irish roots?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which part of Ireland from?
It's tricky because the far back that I can go is to the 1840s, and then so many records have been destroyed.
Wow.
And so my ancestors left the Galway, Longford area to go to the States, and they left during the potato famine, as so many Irish people did at that time. They were escaping poverty and hunger, and that's when my ancestors left.
So one generation made it back.
One generation made it back, and now we've got a couple of kids here, so we'll see where that goes.
That's nice, very nice.
Yeah.
So you had tremendous 14 years in Facebook. Start with the sales director, with one single floor, handful of people, and with multiple offices around Ireland and around Europe. And you become the MD of Facebook Ireland before you left.
Yeah.
How was that 14 years journey been?
I mean, it was, I always say I had a lifetime of memories in 14 years. And I feel so fortunate and lucky that I took that phone call back in the day and made the decision to come, because it has changed my life in so many ways. I mean, when you move internationally, professionally, there's going to be different opportunities. They may work out, they may not. But also you grow personally. And the experiences that I've been able to take advantage of while living in Europe, and go skiing in Austria, or go to Paris for the weekend, or just all the places that I had to visit for my job, I have seen things that as a kid I couldn't have even dreamed of.
Yeah.
And that 14-year journey that I was on, that like I've been able to hold Nelson Mandela's Peace Prize. I've had dinner in Buckingham Palace. I've met princes in India, in Jaipur. So I have done things that I'm very thankful for, and appreciative, and just feel so damn lucky.
Any particular memories you recall? But I can tell you one memory before you come yours. After Christmas parties.
Yeah.
The Bloody Marys.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I always said when they finally boot me out of here, that'll be the one thing that I'd be known for. And thank you for confirming that.
Yeah.
Look, my whole career, I've always, tried to be a fun guy to work with. And the Christmas parties at Facebook were always on Thursday nights, which meant that the next day on Friday, it was still a work day. And so, I said, let's have a Bloody Mary party at 11 o'clock in the morning the next day, for two reasons. Number one, thank you to all the team for a hard year, good work done. Let's have a little fun to celebrate, more as a team. And then also, it's a work day. Get your ass back to work. So I don't care how much you drank the night before at the Christmas party, you still got to get your ass to work the next day. Let's have a little bit of, a party, an after party.
Yeah.
And that just grew and grew. It was fun. We then ended up it went from being just my team, which was maybe 70, 80 people at the time, to a couple of hundred people, to the whole floor. And then, I think the height of it all right before COVID was probably 500-600 people, all amongst the desks on the third floor in, our last building. And we had a DJ, we had food, like it had gone bananas.
Yeah,
right?
like the Christmas party hasn't finished even, it continues to the third floor.
I had so many people say to me, you know what, we're actually leaving the Christmas party early so that we can be there the next day and be, not too much of a zombie.
Absolutely.
So, it's fun. Look, like one of those things that I think a lot of people had a lot of laughs, and I appreciate that, I was able to provide that.
So Rick, from sales throughout Yahoo and then Facebook, you get into gaming and app monetization. How that transition happened? What was that opportunity like?
Look, when I joined Facebook, again, my job was to hire or build out a pan-European sales organization. And I basically did that. And which was more of like an inside sales team. We ended up merging that with the account management team, and I took on the role of the wider organization. So now I'm managing a team that was bigger than I ever had managed before. A couple, well over 130, 40 people, a lot of revenue responsibility, and we grew that to be almost bigger than the Americas organization for that same customer segment. And that had never happened in the history of like ad sales. Like, how is Europe bigger than America? And one of the ways that we were able to do that was there are a lot of gaming companies in Europe that we were calling on that became very large customers of ours. And in 2013, we did a big reorg as the company grew and became more complex. And one of the decisions was to actually pull gaming out of the regional structure and create a fifth region on its own. So you've got North America sales, APAC, LATAM, EMEA, and gaming. And so through this reorg, which was tough for me because I loved my team, they were all in Dublin. Like it was like a very enjoyable time to be working there within that. And now all of a sudden, I was going to have a responsibility of running a global gaming team. So having people in the States, in Asia, in one specific vertical. And I'm like, I'm not a gamer. Like, what the hell do I know about gaming? But I do know direct response advertising, and I do know that the gaming advertisers were the biggest advertisers in the company at that time. And so I said, this is an opportunity for me to sit on the leadership team globally, and I can probably learn a lot from some of the other people that are, sitting on that team as well, that small select group. And I was pretty nervous about it because I didn't want to be pigeonholed into gaming. And I felt almost like it was a little redundant from some of the business that I'd already been running, because a lot of those were gaming companies. And how is this a step up for me? This doesn't necessarily feel great. But I took the leap of faith that it was going to be the right thing. And boy, oh boy, I really, that was, again, sometimes the decisions that you make are not always, sometimes luck has a lot to do with these things.
Yeah.
And it was a great move that I made, because what happened was in 2013 is mobile phones became ubiquitous. Everybody now had the computing power in the pocket that people only at that point had on their desktop. And so as they're using Facebook services and, shortly thereafter Instagram, you're scrolling through and you're seeing ads, and you might see a gaming ad. You click on that gaming ad, it installs a game right on your phone. You can play, you can, purchase different additional goods, which is how they all make their money.
Yeah.
And so at that time, it was a absolutely perfect product for gaming companies, mobile gaming in particular, to be on that Facebook newsfeed platform. And so, again, my area of expertise being direct response advertising, we built the right systems, teams to really go after that gaming market. And it really was defined by three different subcategories: mobile gaming, which is like 80% of the business, console gaming, which is Nintendo and PlayStation and Ubisoft. That was about only 10% of the business. And then the other 10 was real money gambling. So DraftKings and Paddy Power and so on and so forth. So mobile gaming really was that sweet spot. And it ended up becoming, double-digit percentage of Facebook revenue. It was a massive component to how Facebook was making money back then. And so I'm proud to be able to have built the teams and led the teams that really serviced all the developers around the world. I guess what happened is you asked me about app monetization, or before I even got to be the MD.
Yeah.
We were looking at the business and app monetization. Every app that's out there, they got to make money one way or another. Either they're charging for a subscription, or a lot of them show advertising within their apps. So if you look at Facebook would take all of their advertisers, their a couple of million, at the time, to 9, 10, 12 million, and they would show those advertisers on third-party apps, whether it be a weather app, a clock. Think on your phone of all the apps that you have, those ads that are there. Either Google's selling them or Facebook, or there's a couple of others out there, but those are the two major sources there. And so a lot of those apps were gaming apps. So it made sense to bring that team under my purview, running the gaming business, because those same apps were advertisers, and then now they were being paid because of the app ads that they were showing, and Facebook would pay them. So there was a whole circular component of how they came together and were partnering with the company. So having done that for about a year and a half, it gave me exposure to, again, more responsibility, more revenue, more different components or different teams. And I had to ask my existing teams to step up and manage them in a different way. And then my good pal, who was the MD of Ireland, ended up leaving the company, and so there was a vacancy at leading from a culture perspective, from an external perspective, sitting on the boards, and I was looking for new ways to challenge myself, and so I raised my hand to do that job.
How was that job, being the MD of Facebook Ireland
It was,
or Meta?
I mean, I was very proud. Again,
Yes.
here's this Boston Irish kid, and now I'm leading one of the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah.
I looked at it as like the premier job in the country, and I was very proud to do that. Having, all the FTEs that were totaled about 3,000 different people, and then contractors about another 4,000 or 5,000 people. So it was, big organizations, and my job wasn't to be each and every one of those people's managers, but to lead culture, to make decisions. And this is all happening throughout COVID. How do you get people back into the office? Why do they want to come back into the office? You got to make it fun for them, feed them fun, and having to navigate those different challenges and move into a whole new office that we were, had been building the prior couple of years. So yeah, I was, I only held the role for about 15 months before I ended up leaving the company, but it was a great cornerstone on my career there.
Yeah. Now that's astonishing journey for 14 years. And the hard question now, Rick, is after 14 years, enjoying your every moment, why you decide to leave Meta?
Well, so in 2022, the company started hitting some challenges and hiccups, and they started looking at gaming, of whether or not they could, potentially, save some resources there. And one of the decisions made was to decentralize gaming and start to move the teams back into the regional structure. Because while our team was very efficient from all the metrics that they look at in terms of profitability and so forth, there was some ancillary workflows that were out of our control that perhaps added some complexity to not only sales but all the cross-functional areas that supported us. So they certainly wanted me to stay as they went through this process, and they were trying to find different roles for me to take on. At the same time, after 14 years, I just didn't think that I wanted to start over with a different org. And I'd put 10 years into gaming, building up the team, growing it internationally. I love working with gaming clients. And to think about starting and doing something different at the company, I just said, I think it's time for maybe to pack it in and do something else. I was getting tired of traveling the world and being in a different time zone every other week. And it's somebody's time at some point, and that's when I made the call to pack it in.
How is Rick now after you are stepped out of Meta?
Man, I'm great. As much as I enjoyed it, I said, Jesus, why did I wait so long? Because it's fun.
Because there are two sides of the coin. One, you enjoy what you do, and you've done for 14 years. Your body and your mind is kind of structured in a way that is the core part of my life.
Yeah.
And when you step out of it, it's like you retire, and after 65, like, okay, what should I do tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I'm trying to understand, how did you feel after that? Okay, I have done 14 years of hard work. That was my life for a long time, and my family also become part of that life along
Without
with
a
that.
doubt, yeah.
And now I'm out of that life suddenly, like, okay, Rick, what should I do 9 a.m. in the morning?
There's a couple things that I would say to this. Number one, when you have a role like that for so long, it becomes part of your identity.
Yeah.
I'm proud to say what I do, even though Facebook has gone through its publicly well-known challenges. I was always proud to work at the company and so forth. And so the thought of not being able to say Rick Kelley, the Facebook guy, that was very scary. And that almost made me say I should figure out how to, another role in the company and stick around. And certainly the MD job, I had, only, scratched the surface on what I wanted to do there. So there were plenty of reasons for me to stay. But at the same time, it's also recognizing that you're becoming a little irritable around some of the tasks that you would have to do. Some of the meetings that would show up on your calendar, you'd be just like, oh, don't want to do this, or I don't feel this is a valuable use of my time. And when those, you have a balance, right? That balance sheet. And when those start to tick up more and more, and the enjoyment and the joy you get, starts to go down, we only have one life. And then if you're doing those things for the wrong reasons, you're not going to be that good at them.
Yeah.
So either you start to, I guess, water down your reputation because you're not doing those jobs as effectively. Just call it a day and call it. And that's what I did. And so it's a hard thing to leave, and that next day not be in the car at 8:00 in the morning going to work. But you got to find other ways to find joy, and I think I've done that.
Yeah. So what's been the highlights of Rick since then? What you been doing, Rick?
Highlights for sure have been being able to spend more time at home, not being jet lagged, perhaps not being irritable, getting off a plane and being tired. My younger son, he plays hurling, which is an Irish GAA sport, and he played for a school and had matches all through the spring at 2:30 in the afternoon on a Thursday. I never would have been able to make any of those matches, and I made them all. He ended up going and playing in the national stadium for the schoolboy championship, which unfortunately they lost. But being able to go there and see all of these things and spend time and be able to create space around what I wanted to do. I want to attend those games. I want to exercise. I want to travel. I want to say yes to going to my college. I hadn't seen a lot of my college friends in 17 or 18 years in the Pittsburgh area. And they, would always have different reunions. Oh, no, I've got to be in India. Oh, no, I've got to do this.
Yeah.
Never was able to go. Last year, boom, I'm there. And being able to say yes to things has been amazing and awesome.
That's good. It's always nice to take personal time and, focus on family and friends.
Yeah.
Because they are an important part of your life as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One last thing around Facebook. You mentioned about 25 lessons you learned over 25 years.
Yeah.
I know you're going to talk about it in your YouTube channel or some shape or form.
I got to get that going. Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you want to touch base a little bit on what are those lessons around and what viewers should look forward to when they come out?
Yeah. Well, look, I'll polish it up. But, the short story is that I was asked to address a team that was not a sales organization team, and it was an international team. And it was in my last week there. I'm like, oh man, just let me walk out the door here. But I wanted to make sure that I made it relevant to them. And so I kind of had just sat down and flowing out of my fingertips became 25 things I learned over a 25-year career. And some of them, were kind of more serious and different life lessons that I think are valuable. And some of them were more funny and, kind of joking to break up the monotony of having 25. There are core principles that I included in that. And part of them is for example, you got to work hard and you got to hustle because somebody wants your job. No matter where you are within the pecking order of an organization, somebody wants your job, and you've got to justify every day why it still belongs to you. So whether it's being extra diligent around the work that's got to be done, building relationships, strengthening, the core job responsibilities. I think it's one of those things that you've got to always recognize. Another thing is, how are you like to work with? Are you seen as someone that's difficult, someone that's enjoyable, someone that can help push other people in the positive ways and help them learn? And I think one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned in my career is, from the people that I didn't want to emulate, maybe leaders that I had seen behaviors in them that I did not want people to think of me that way. Because as you formulate your own management style, you're taking the good things that you see from, leaders, and you're also recognizing the things that you want other people to think about you, and you hopefully don't do them. And so it's being aware that, you can gain insight into your own style from many different touch points. And at the end of the day, I think it's important to find out what motivates you. Personally, I'm motivated by awful things, scared, or my own fear of, I don't want to be, seen as being incapable. I don't want to be, certainly, I told the story about where I fit out on the whiteboard. I didn't want to get fired. I didn't want to be seen as being shit, right? And so, you could be motivated by financial reasons or recognition. But figuring out like, okay, whatever it is that motivates you, and exploit it and get out of bed first thing in the morning, trying to solve for that thing that's really really at you there. Yeah, I don't know. Like I could go 23 more,
No,
but we'll save that for another time.
We save that, and I look forward to your videos coming out on those, because those are really valuable lessons, especially for the next generation. Rick, is how you climb the ladder. Things you have learned over time with experiences is so valuable. So I do look forward to having you making the videos on that.
There you go. All right, that's the motivation I need. I've been sitting on that list for about 12 months and figuring out, how do you bring it to life? But yeah, I think people that watched it might have a few laughs and enjoy some of the comments.
Yeah, last time we met in Dublin Tech Summit during summertime, a few months ago.
Yep.
You involved in one startup, which I know. I think you are involved with a lot of other startup ecosystem.
Yep.
So talk a bit more about that, Rick.
Well, I guess in my post-Meta career, I've found myself now working with a handful of startups, either angel investing in a handful or helping them figure out what their go-to-market is, help them navigate some product questions in terms of what audiences do they go after, or how do they deploy resources. So I have the benefit of working in a very intelligent organization that had a lot of processes, and later in my time there, that maybe I can help bring some of the structure to other companies. And so I've found myself having a new career, working in the, investing in different startups. And I'm enjoying that. And it's pretty young, and I've only been at it for about, 12 months now, I'd say. But yeah, that's something that I'm enjoying, all these new ideas that these young, energetic founders have, and then just helping, maybe put a little slant on it from my perspective on how they can cut the chase.
Are you specifically working with startups in Irish ecosystem, or you are engaged with things in the US or other regions?
Yeah, so it started as being very opportunistic. Like, for example, I know the company of Facebook is putting a lot of effort into monetizing WhatsApp through business messaging. But they're also relying on third parties to get that done, third-party companies. So, one of the first ways that I got involved with startups was working with some of those third-party companies that were looking to help bridge what WhatsApp offers and what customers need, and then build businesses off of the back of that. Whether through my network that I have of advertisers and internal people at Facebook, but also just understanding that space. So that was my first two endeavors in the startup world were with companies like that. And then it just kind of steamrolled and snowballed from there, and working with a couple of other Irish-based companies that are, in the consumer space, and one that's in the United States now, one that's in London. And I think what's next for me is, how do I create a little bit more strategy around who I invest my time with, or who I invest my my resources with? Because right now it's been kind of like who Oh, I know Rick, and so let me introduce you, and then I meet that team, and I'm like, oh yeah, they're a smart team, smart product, let's move forward. But I've got to take a step back, I think, and actually put a little operational expertise, kind of what I'm preaching to these folks. I got to do that with myself, because a lot of people want your time. You don't always have the right experience or knowledge with that product line, and so how do I do that more effectively for me and for them is kind of what I'm trying to figure out next.
Okay, that's really good. I think there's a lot of opportunities in startup world, and that world is growing at rapid pace, especially with a lot of layoffs happening. People are, with skill sets, and there's a lot of smart people being laid off for whatever the reason is. A lot of are going into that startup mindset, and trying to get into this whole ecosystem. So it's a great space to be in. Charities, you involve in a lot of charities. One I know is about the ambulance for the kids.
Yeah.
So you want to talk a bit about that, and what else you are involved in the charity side?
Well, I'm a pretty lucky guy, and I recognize that not everybody else has the same health luck, or that could change in a minute, right? Like, problem could happen as I step out the door. But one of the areas that have been very passionate to me is children's health. And we have a service here in Ireland called Bumbulance. And it was founded by a gentleman and his wife that had two very sick children that ultimately ended up passing away. And getting to and from the hospitals from their home in Kerry was a traumatic experience both for them and for their kids. Um, so he started a charity, and they needed me to come on as a board member. And since we have now have 18 ambulances on the road in Ireland, and these ambulances are cool. They have PlayStations in there. They have iPads. They are sensory helpful to kids, and making that trip from wherever they live to the hospitals to and fro a little less scary. And I've been very proud to sit on the board for about 8 years now of that charity and raise money and to, again, help them navigate, how do we get more vehicles on the road? How do we fuel those vehicles? How do we create partnerships with other, third-party companies with new tires and gasoline and things like that? So I've been very proud to be a part of that. And it's funny, like my wife has become involved in different points, and my kids have raised money at different points. And that's forever. I'm very thankful to have been able to, contribute there. And then there's other things that I do more on an ad hoc basis. I've started getting more involved with a charity called Deborah Ireland, which is, to help, support patients with a very difficult to live with skin disease. And so that I'm kind of in the early stages of working with them, but one that I'm eager to, try and dedicate more time and effort to.
How are you on a personal level, Rick, outside the work, the startups, the charities? What do you do in your spare time, or if you have a spare time?
I do have spare time, and I love the fact that I do now all of a sudden. And one of my biggest goals coming out of the corporate world was I'm going to lower my golf handicap. And good God Almighty, that has not happened yet after about 15 months away. I'm playing better, but I don't know. It's not translating to my scorecard. But I play probably golf once or twice a week. I like to exercise. I love to travel. Now that I'm being able to do a little bit more of that for personal reasons. I just spent 7 weeks in Maine. I have a home in Maine, in New England, and not having to get on and do performance reviews and calls with Singapore and all the other things. I'm really enjoying the. I call it fun employment. I'm not going to call it retirement. I'm probably, at this stage too young to retire, but for now, this is working, and we'll see where this takes us.
I think you have a lot more control on your life, I would say, that you can make things and do the decisions which are more relevant to you than to the work. So you can spend more time playing golf if that's what passionates you now.
To me, sometimes I spend 15 hours a week meeting with startups or having coffees with ex-coworkers or whatever. Sometimes I spend 5.
Yeah.
If I want to spend 25, I could do that. But that's my call now.
Absolutely.
And I can weigh it against the other things that I have going on.
Yeah.
I'm making dinners a little bit more frequently now. My lawn looks freaking perfect.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
So I'm in good shape.
Yeah. Keeping Kim happy now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a tough job. But
yeah, I know. That's good. At the very last, Rick, with your experience, tons of experience, what message you want to share to our audience?
Well, I mentioned you got to hustle, and hard work is, certainly I'm not the smartest person in the room ever. But there's rarely a time when people will outwork me. And that's been core to kind of how I've built my career. But on the flip side of that, that's important. But also, I've always tried to be a fun person to work with and someone that other people enjoyed working with. You mentioned the Bloody Marys. It's, probably the biggest thing that I miss about going into the office every day is that first 10 minutes of banter and cracking jokes in the morning about, my commute or something crazy that happened to me on my way in. And like that camaraderie with other people has always been important. And I think it's important for anybody that works with other people, which is everybody out there, is, are you a good person to work with? Do people enjoy working with you?
Nice. That's great. With that, we end our conversation today. Rick, thank you so much for your time. It's an absolute pleasure learning and understanding your journey, the hard work of showing the demos of vacuum cleaner to FedEx and all the way to making on top of, Meta. and now helping startup with all the experience. And I look forward to seeing you in the next startup event. And of course, golf.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here and allowing me to share my story.
Great.